Are you crying again? That's what he said, as I sat curled up on the floor, eyes red and swollen, after discovering the deed had been transferred without my knowledge. He didn't comfort me. He didn't explain. He just laughed out loud. And in that moment, I went silent. Not because I was weak, but because I had already read every line of the original contract 2 months ago, and the rightful owner was still me. My name is Lauren McKinley. I live in Tampa, Florida. Or at least, I used to live in what I thought was our condo, the one I helped choose, the one I furnished, the one I paid the down payment for. Zachary Hale and I were what people on Instagram might call the startup couple. We built a small digital marketing agency together, and it actually took off. We were making money, going on business trips, and posting just enough to make it all look effortless. But none of it was effortless, especially not with him. We decided to buy a place by the bay, something modern, sleek, and impressive. A condo right off Bayshore Boulevard, glass walls, open kitchen, ocean breeze. It was everything I'd dreamed of. And when it came time to sign the documents, I didn't even hesitate. We put both our names on the title, Zachary Hale and Lauren McKinley. Joint tenancy, equal rights, shared responsibility. Or so I thought. The deposit came from my personal savings. That's over $40,000. He said he'd pay me back once the next client invoice clears. It never did. But I didn't push. Because I believed in us. Because I believed in him. The first few months were nice. We hosted dinner parties, worked late at the same kitchen counter, talked about babies and wedding venues in passing, always with a laugh. But slowly, the laughing stopped. The client calls became excuses. The argument started with missing toothpaste caps and ended with me crying in the shower. Zachary became colder. He stopped coming home on weekends. When I asked where he was, he'd smirk. Don't be clingy. We're not married. That sentence, it echoed in my brain like a slap. We're not married. Of course not. That's why he could slowly start removing me from everything without any legal consequence. He changed the Netflix account password, then the Wi-Fi, then the smart lock code. He said it was for security. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. But I watched. Every move, every file, every single envelope that arrived with a return address. Until one night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I went to the office. I opened the drawer labeled Insurance and Tax, and I saw it. A packet with the condo's name on top. I pulled it out, and my hands began to shake, because inside was a form I had never signed, a form that showed the condo, our condo being transferred under his name only, filed, dated, stamped. With a forged version of my signature at the bottom, I sat down on the floor, back against the cabinet, hands covering my face, and I cried, like a child, like a woman betrayed, like someone who had built a home only to be evicted silently. That's when he walked in, Zachary, standing in the doorway, watching me. And do you know what he said? He didn't say, sorry, didn't ask what was wrong. He tilted his head and laughed. Are you crying again? He said it like I was pathetic, like I was entertainment, like he had won. But what Zachary didn't know, what he never knew, was that I'd already made copies of everything. The day we bought the condo, I made an appointment at SunTrust Bank. They notarized and certified a copy of the joint ownership agreement. I kept it in a safety deposit box, not out of mistrust, but out of habit, because I've been burned before. And I wasn't about to let anyone steal from me again. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I stood up, wiped my face, and walked past him. He thought I was giving up. But what I was doing was beginning the morning after. Zachary acted like nothing happened. He poured himself coffee, played some obnoxious house music, tossed me a half smile like we were still partners, still something. But that night changed everything. Not because I cried, but because I finally stopped pretending I didn't know who he really was. He tried to play it off when I confronted him later that week. I walked into the kitchen, held the packet of forged documents in my hand, and asked, flatly, "Did you submit this?" He didn't even flinch, just leaned against the counter and smirked like a villain in a bad movie. "It's just a refinancing form," he shrugged. "Legal mumbo-jumbo. You wouldn't understand." I stared at him, so calmly he almost didn't notice the silence. No, but that was his mistake. He always underestimated silence. What he didn't know was that I'd already contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, Melanie Choi, a specialist in property disputes. Sharp, fast, and meticulous. She looked at the documents I scanned and said, "Without hesitation, he committed fraud. And if we move quietly, we can flip this back before he even sees it coming." I liked the sound of that. Quiet revenge. The kind that stings hardest when they think they've won. Melanie filed a notice of challenge to title with the Hillsborough County Clerk's office. It flagged the transfer as disputed. That meant Zachary couldn't sell, lease, or refinance the condo without triggering a legal hold. I didn't tell him. Why would I? He was already throwing himself a victory parade. He started bringing strangers over, loud women in stilettos and synthetic perfume, brokers with shiny folders and big promises. They walked through my kitchen, touched my couch, made comments about remodeling the bathroom. I watched it all in silence. Slept on the pull-out couch while he claimed the master bedroom. But every morning, I was on the phone, with my lawyer, with the county office, with the title agency, building a case, line by line. And then, it happened. One morning, I woke up to find an envelope slipped under the door, a legal notification, stamped, sealed, official. From the clerk of court's office. I opened it slowly. My breath caught halfway. It was a letter confirming the title challenge was active, and that any future sale or modification of the property would be frozen until the dispute was resolved. He couldn't touch it, not without me. That same afternoon, I heard him on the phone, yelling, pacing. "What do you mean it's on hold? That's impossible. She didn't sign anything." He stormed into the living room, eyes wild. "Did you do this?" he demanded. I looked at him, calm, measured. "You said I wouldn't understand legal mumbo-jumbo." I said, "Guess I learned fast." He was furious, but fury can't undo paper trails. It can't erase notarized evidence. And it sure as hell can't scare someone who's already walked through fire. Zachary tried to fight it. Filed a counterclaim saying I was mentally unstable, that I was trying to sabotage his property. But Melanie, she came prepared, with emails, with receipts, with the original ownership certificate that had both our names, and a handwriting expert who confirmed the signature on the transfer document was not mine. It was forged. When we submitted that report to the court, the judge didn't even blink. He granted a temporary injunction preventing Zachary from altering the property in any way, and scheduled a hearing. Zachary showed up to that hearing in a linen blazer and fake charm, tried to talk circles around the facts, but the facts were a noose, and he tied it himself. When the judge asked if I had anything to say, I stood up, looked Zachary dead in the eye, and I said, "Your Honor." This man laughed while I cried on the floor of a home I helped build. He tried to erase me from it, but I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just read the contract, and remembered that truth doesn't shout, it shows up in court. The room was silent, Zachary's mouth slightly open. No more laughter. The judge ruled in my favor, restored the title to its original state, and ordered Zachary to pay for my legal fees. When we left the courtroom, he tried to follow me outside, tried to talk, but I didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him. I walked back to the condo alone, put my key in the door, walked inside, and for the first time in months, it felt like home again. Not because he was gone, but because I had taken back what was mine, silently, legally, and completely. I didn't move out. He expected I would, but I didn't. I stayed. I cooked quietly. I cleaned up after myself. I made tea at 6 a.m., like I always had. But what I was really doing was documenting every message, every form, every time he mentioned anything about the condo. He once said to his friend over speakerphone, "She's not even on the title anymore. It's all mine." I recorded it, saved it to the cloud, sent it to Melanie. I started keeping a journal. Not because I needed to vent, but to timestamp everything. Every day he disrespected me. Every time he walked past like I was invisible. It all became evidence. And that evidence became my armor. One night, after his failed attempt to show the condo to another buyer, he snapped, threw a glass into the sink, said I was ruining his future. He called me a ghost, a squatter, said I was just hanging on because I had nowhere else to go. I didn't reply. I just opened my laptop and typed everything he said, word for word. The day of the hearing, I dressed in gray slacks and a clean navy blouse. Nothing flashy, just sharp. My heart pounded the whole way there. But my face, still. Melanie met me outside the courthouse. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Let him talk first. Arrogance always exposes itself." And oh, it did. He strutted into that courtroom like it was a stage, talked about ownership rights and financial contributions, painted me as some emotional wreck who was lashing out because we broke up. The judge didn't even blink. Then it was Melanie's turn, and she pulled out the receipts, bank transfers, recorded statements, the certified ownership documents, and the forensic report confirming the signature on the deed transfer was fraudulent. Zachary stopped smiling then. His lawyer leaned away from him like he could smell the loss. But the moment that undid him truly was when Melanie played the voicemail. His voice saying, "She's not even on the title anymore. It's all mine." It was like watching a house of cards collapse, in slow motion, in front of an audience. When the judge ruled in my favor, I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just breathed, because for the first time in months, I could finally exhale. He was ordered to pay back legal fees. He was warned not to interfere with my share of the property again. And within 30 days, he was required to vacate or renegotiate under my terms. He stormed out, didn't even look back, and you know what I didn't need him to? When I walked back into that condo, alone, I paused. The windows still faced the bay. The air still smelled like salt and possibility. But it felt different. Not because he was gone, but because I was still there. Not broken, not erased, but standing. And this time, I wasn't standing in silence because I was afraid. I was standing in silence because I had already spoken, in the language of facts, in the voice of the law, and the echo of justice. It was louder than any laugh he ever gave me. After Zachary left, the condo was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it confronts. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching the light spill through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. I didn't just fight for the condo. I fought for proof that I wasn't disposable, that I couldn't be erased. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cologne he used to spray too much of. There were still fingerprints on the glass balcony door. Shadows of him remained, but they no longer haunted me. They reminded me of how far I had come. The first thing I did was open every single window. Let the wind flood the space. Let it sweep out the arrogance, the gaslighting, the echo of laughter that once broke me. Then I started over. Not just in furniture or routine, but in mindset. I turned the master bedroom into a sanctuary, painted the walls a calming slate blue. I bought fresh linens, not expensive, just soft, comfortable, mine. I even replaced the old couch, the one he picked out, because it looked modern on camera. Now it's a plush velvet green sectional I chose without compromise, and I sit on it every morning with my coffee, legs tucked under me, watching the sunrise. But healing wasn't linear. There were nights I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a sweat, half dreaming I was still locked in legal war, or worse, still invisible in my own home. There were moments in the shower where tears came fast and loud, not from sadness, but release. I didn't try to suppress those moments. I let them move through me, because silence wasn't just how I reclaimed the condo, it was how I learned to hear myself again. A few weeks after the court ruling, I got a letter from the county office, confirmation of the updated deed, my name, alone. The title was clean, uncontested, final. I framed that page, hung it beside the front door, not as a flex, but as a reminder that what's mine cannot be stolen. Not if I'm willing to fight back quietly, strategically, legally. Funny thing is, people started noticing a difference in me. Friends I hadn't seen in months dropped by. They said things like, "You look lighter," and "You're glowing." And the truth is, I was. Because letting go of someone who tried to shrink you has a way of making you feel 10 feet tall. One Saturday morning, while I was watering the plants on the balcony, I saw Zachary across the street. He didn't see me. He was standing at the corner, waiting for the crosswalk light to change. No suit, no sunglasses. Just normal, human. For a second, the old version of me would have looked for validation, maybe even waved. But the new me, I sipped my coffee and stepped back inside. I didn't need him to know I was okay, because I knew it. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it." No name, no signature. But I didn't need one. I burned it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need closure. I already had peace. With the condo fully mine, I made one final decision. I took out a small business loan, renovated the guest room into an office space, and launched my own consulting brand. Not ours. Not his and mine, just mine. McKinley Media, sharp, sleek, clean, just like the life I was building. Clients came slowly, then all at once. Referrals, reviews, repeat contracts. And every time I signed a new deal, I walked barefoot across the hardwood floors of my condo and whispered, "We're doing just fine." Not to anyone else. Just to the girl who cried on that floor not long ago. She didn't cry for nothing. She cried to begin again. Now, every inch of this home carries a piece of that journey. The rug I chose without a fight. The wine glasses that are no longer props for photos. The quiet hum of the dishwasher at night reminding me I'm not rushing to clean before someone complains. Just me, my silence, and the kind of strength you don't post online. So if anyone ever asks how I got the condo back, I don't tell them about the courthouse, or the forged signature, or even the judge's gavel. I just say, "He laughed when I cried, so I learned how to fight without raising my voice." The seasons changed. Summer faded into a soft Florida fall, where the air turned lighter and the breeze gentler. I found myself waking up earlier, no longer out of dread, but possibility. I started jogging again. Not far. Just enough to feel my breath, my pace, my life moving forward. My life moving. And with that movement, new people entered. I joined a local entrepreneurship circle, made friends. Not everything clicked at first, but no one tried to dim me down. There was one woman, Elise, a fellow founder who rented an office just a few blocks from my place. She'd come by sometimes after work, and we'd talk about contracts, marketing, and coffee that actually tasted good. No drama, no games, just real human connection. One Friday, we went to a networking mixer downtown. It was full of business owners, freelancers, old classmates. And then I saw him, Zachary. Standing across the room, he was talking to someone new, someone younger. Same smirk, same cologne. But this time, I didn't freeze. I didn't shrink. He noticed me. His smile faltered. I didn't walk over, didn't nod. Just turned my back and asked Elise about her newest branding client. She didn't even notice the exchange because there wasn't one. That night, I walked home alone and barefoot from the parking garage, heels in hand, wind in my hair. I laughed. Because I finally understood something. Silence isn't weakness. It's power. It's a choice. A decision not to waste breath explaining your worth to someone who already devalued it. Back at the condo, I lit a candle. The flame flickered softly against the glass, and in the reflection, I saw myself stronger, clearer, freer. I wasn't the woman who cried on the floor anymore. I was the woman who rebuilt from it, brick by silent brick. It wasn't until the end of October that the final thread snapped. Not a dramatic moment, not a showdown, just a letter. An official notice from the building's HOA. Apparently, Zachary had filed a complaint months ago claiming I was an unauthorized occupant. It had been dismissed, quietly, efficiently, but the record remained, and now I held the proof in my hands. For a second, I just stared at it, not out of anger, but disbelief. Even after all that, after the court, the injunction, the restitution, he still tried to rewrite the story, to erase me from a home I rebuilt with my own two hands. But here's the thing about stories. You can edit the narrative all you want, but the truth always leaves a paper trail. I scanned the letter, filed it away, and made one phone call. To the HOA manager. Her name was Judith. She'd been cold before, bureaucratic, but this time, her voice softened. "I saw your name on the deed," she said. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Inconvenience, what a word for everything I had survived. But I let it go, because I didn't need her apology. I already had something better: control and the power to shape what came next. I decided to host a dinner party. Small, intimate, real, 6 guests. All people who'd stood by me. Elise, of course. Melanie, my lawyer, now my friend. 2 clients who'd become confidants. And a neighbor couple from the 4th floor who once left soup at my door when I was sick. I cooked everything myself. Lamb roast, roasted vegetables, a berry crumble from my grandmother's recipe. And as we sat around the reclaimed wood table I'd found at a local flea market, someone said, "Lauren, this place feels like you." And it hit me. Not just the compliment, but the truth in it. This condo, the walls, the light, the energy, they were mine. Finally, fully, undeniably. After dessert, Melanie clinked her glass and made a toast. To rebuilding, she said, to reclaiming. We all raised our glasses, and I swallowed back the lump in my throat, because no one there knew the sound of Zachary's laughter when I cried. No one knew the taste of silence soaked in shame, but they didn't need to, because they saw me now, whole, present, powerful. That night, after everyone left, I stood at the balcony with a glass of wine. The city glowed beneath me, not in chaos, not in tension, but in quiet brilliance. And I remembered something my mother used to say: "Not all victories are loud, some arrive like sunrise." She was right. My story didn't end in a scream. It ended in a whisper, a held breath, a step forward. A few weeks later, I got a call from someone unexpected, Zachary's assistant, his former one. She told me he'd lost a few major clients. That word had gotten around about the forged document case, that some investors had backed out. She didn't gloat. She sounded tired, worn out by the same pattern I once lived through. She said, "He always underestimates quiet people." I told her, "That's why we always win." We laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly, like women who've walked through fire and came out with clean hands. After we hung up, I sat down at my desk, opened my notebook, and started writing. Not a journal, not a case file, a book about women and silence, about power that doesn't need to shout, about how we lose ourselves, and then find something even stronger. Each chapter started with a sentence I had once been told to believe: "You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're just being emotional." And each chapter ended with the truth I uncovered: that my sensitivity was a compass, that my emotions were data, that my silence was never weakness. It was strategy. It was armor. It was home. Just like the condo. That night, I walked from room to room with bare feet, the wood cool beneath me. I ran my hand across the surface of the dining table, tracing its imperfections. I touched the edge of the wall where, once, I had pressed my forehead, hiding tears, and in the bathroom mirror, I looked at myself not searching for wounds, but recognizing resilience. Every corner of this place once held tension. Now, it holds peace, because I earned it, not with noise, not with violence, but with precision, with persistence, with the quiet weight of truth. In the morning, sunlight poured in through the sheer curtains. It struck the frame by the front door, the one holding my clean title deed. For a moment, it shimmered like gold, not because of its paper or print, but because of what it represented. That I, Lauren McKinley, am not someone you push out. I am someone who comes back stronger, someone who learns every crack in the system and uses it to build solid ground. In the months that followed, I didn't just grow my business. I grew into myself, into my voice, my presence, my softness that now doubled as strength. People still ask why I never went public with what Zachary did, why I didn't post it online, why I didn't expose him. And I tell them this because I didn't need to make noise to make impact. Because the best revenge isn't a story they can scroll past, it's a life they can't touch. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the glass again, and this time it stopped me. Because I didn't see the woman who begged to be seen. I saw the woman who saw herself, fully, and with that, the story turned from survival into sovereignty. A few months later, I received an unexpected invitation. A local real estate development group was hosting a panel on women and property ownership. Someone had nominated me to speak. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't famous. I was just someone who refused to be erased. But then I realized that was exactly the point. The night of the panel, I wore a deep green blazer and carried no notes. When they called my name, I stood under warm lights and told the truth. I told them about the condo, about Zachary, about the tears, the silence, the fight no one saw coming. I told them how I took back my home not through rage but through paper, through documentation, through believing in my own right to exist. The room was quiet, not out of discomfort but reverence. When I finished, someone in the back stood up and clapped, then another, and another. Afterward, a young woman approached me, eyes glassy, voice shaking. She said, "I thought I was the only one." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You're never the only one. You're just the next one, to rise." And in that moment, I knew what I reclaimed wasn't just a condo. It was my dignity, my identity, my legacy. Because this home was never just about square footage. It was about sovereignty. It was about saying without screaming, "I belong here." And I'm never leaving again. The condo wasn't just a home anymore. It was a symbol of the war I didn't choose, but refused to lose. Of the silence I was once punished for and then used as power. Of how a woman like me, soft-spoken, dismissed, could win. Legally. Quietly. Permanently. But there's a truth no one tells you about survival stories. Even after you win, echoes remain, not ghosts, not regrets, just echoes. The feeling of double-checking the door lock at night, the habit of scanning mail for hidden threats, the memory of how easily love can turn to leverage. And I carried those echoes with grace. Not to dwell in fear, but to remember I came through it. Untouched in the places that matter most. One day, I stood in front of a mirror and said aloud, "You're not surviving anymore. You're living." And for the first time, I believed it. I started mentoring younger women, not as a coach, just as someone who'd been through the dark and kept her hands clean, We'd meet in coffee shops, trade stories, hold space for each other's fears, and I realized I wasn't just building my business anymore. I was building something deeper, a legacy of women who don't scream to be heard, who move mountains with paperwork and still wear perfume to court. Then came the letter, handwritten, tidy, formal. Zachary's mother. She said she'd heard what happened, said she'd believed I was just another pretty distraction in his long line of disposable women. But she was wrong. She wrote, "You were the first woman who didn't fight him with fire. You fought with light." I didn't write back, but I folded that letter carefully and placed it in a drawer labeled Proof. Not for revenge, just for reminder. Some weeks later, I was invited to teach a workshop, Legal Literacy for First-Time Buyers. I stood in a small library meeting room with a whiteboard and a folder of sample deeds. I started by asking a question. How many of you have signed something you didn't fully understand? Almost every hand went up. Then I said, "Let me tell you what happens when you read every word." They leaned in, not because I was loud, but because I spoke from the scar, not the wound. After the session, a young mother stayed behind. She said her ex had taken the house and left her with debt. She cried, and I didn't comfort her with cliches. I just said, "Cry tonight, plan tomorrow. And next week, pull your credit report and check your name on every deed you've ever touched." She nodded, and in her eyes I saw myself. The condo became more than mine. It became a hub, a safe space, a gathering point. Once a month, I hosted Quiet Wins Night. No microphones, no speeches, just women sitting on the floor, drinking wine, and sharing one silent victory they had that month. Getting a raise, leaving a toxic friend, saying no without guilt. No clapping, just nods, as if to say, "We see you, you're not alone." And then came the moment I didn't expect. The Condo Association asked if I'd consider running for board president. Me, the woman who once sat crying on the tile floor. Me, the unauthorized occupant. I said yes, not because I wanted control, but because I wanted to ensure no one else would be erased the way I almost was. My first proposal, a homeowner education night, held quarterly. My second, legal aid referrals for tenants in contested housing. The vote passed, unanimously. Change didn't roar, it unfolded, one whisper at a time. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I lit a single candle, sat by the window with a glass of ginger tea, and wrote a letter to myself. Just one line. You took back more than a condo. You took back your voice. I tucked it behind the deed in its frame, a message for the future. So if anyone ever asks what happened, why I stayed, how I fought, what it cost, I tell them this. He laughed when I cried. But in the silence that followed, I rebuilt an empire he'll never touch. A month later, I was invited back to the same condo where it all began. Not as a tenant, not as someone being pushed out, but as a guest of honor at the annual community summit. I stood on the same steps where Zachary once told the concierge I wasn't on the paperwork. This time, the front desk greeted me with a smile. "Welcome back, Miss Lauren McKinley." I walked through the lobby wearing a deep navy dress and quiet confidence, and when I stepped onto the stage to speak, I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about resilience, about how protecting your name isn't pride, it's preservation, about how silence can be a scalpel, carving truth from betrayal. The room fell silent, but not the kind that hurts, the kind that listens, that honors, that remembers. I ended my speech with the line I once whispered to myself the day I walked back into the condo. This home is mine, not because I shouted, but because I stayed. Afterward, people came up to me not just to congratulate me, but to confess their own stories. Stories of forged signatures, of being told they didn't belong, of rebuilding in silence. And I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a pattern, one we were breaking one woman at a time. On my way out, I looked back at the building. The lights shimmered off the glass. My reflection looked right back at me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like someone who fought to stay. I felt like someone who had arrived. That evening, I walked home just as the sun was setting. The hallway was still, quiet as ever. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. The light stretched long across the floorboards, just like it had the day I cried on them. But this time, there were no tears, just the faint sound of wind against the windows, and my own heartbeat calm, steady. I poured a glass of red wine, sat down at my desk, and opened a fresh document. Typed the title of my first book. He laughed when I cried, how I took back my home in silence. And beneath it, in italics, Chapter 1, Proof Doesn't Scream, it shows up in court. I smiled, because I knew this was never just about walls and windows. It was about reclaiming the space within myself, making room for power I had buried, for clarity I had earned. I wrote for hours, not to tell the world what he did to me, but to remind every woman what she can do for herself. And just before midnight, I closed my laptop, stood at the window one last time, and whispered the words I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to be loud to be unforgettable.